They said marriage would bring her into a new family. They didn't say she'd be folding its laundry by day and crying by night. Her mother-in-law had money, pride, and a long memory for slights. But what she forgot was who owned the ground beneath her feet. The wedding was small, tasteful, and nothing like the fairy tale she'd once imagined. A gold bangle on her wrist, a garland of jasmine around her neck, and eyes watching her like she didn't belong. From the moment she stepped through the grand iron gates of the family estate, her mother-in-law's smile was polite but pointed. "Leave your suitcase by the door. We'll sort it later," she said, already walking ahead. No hugs. No warmth. Just polished marble floors and expectations. She had married a deal out of love, not wealth. He was soft-spoken, a little too loyal to his family, but he made her feel safe. At least he used to. Her room wasn't with Adil but in the servants' wing. Just until the renovations upstairs finish, his mother explained. She sat on the unfamiliar bed that night, sari creased, makeup smudged, heart sinking. This was supposed to be a beginning. But it felt like she had just stepped into someone else's rules, and she wasn't sure they planned on letting her leave. By the third morning she'd learned the rhythm of the house, only because she'd been forced to run it. Her mother-in-law didn't yell. He didn't have to. Instructions were passed down like scripture, always with a cool smile. Breakfast must be served by 7:15. The silver cutlery, not the stainless steel. Garden flowers, freshly cut, every morning for the table centerpiece. And it was her job now. She swept floors while the actual housemaid ironed blouses. Washed dishes while the cook sipped tea. When she once asked, "Shouldn't the staff handle this?" her mother-in-law answered, "We don't rely on strangers for personal things. Your family, after all." The irony stung more than she let on. She didn't tell Adil. He worked late, and when he did come home he kissed her forehead like she was made of porcelain. Fragile, silent, and breakable. She laughed less. Slept less. But every night she remembered her own mother's words. The first months after marriage, that's when they decide who you are. Don't let them decide wrong. She just hadn't known they'd already made up their minds. It wasn't even hidden. Her mother-in-law actually taped a list to the fridge. A bulleted, color-coded list. Daily routine, for Amina. Wake up, 5:30 a.m. Iron everyone's clothes. Make breakfast for 3. Polish brass temple bowls. Clean front porch. At first Amina stared at it in disbelief. Then she laughed. Truly this was a joke. Yes. A weird family tradition. It wasn't. When she forgot to polish the brass one morning, her mother-in-law clicked her tongue so loudly at the dining table, even the help looked up. Back in my day we didn't need reminders to respect tradition. The way she said, tradition, always felt like a dagger in silk. Beautiful but made to pierce. Adil. He didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. Either way, when he handed her the grocery list that evening and kissed her cheek, she smiled. And when he turned away, her smile crumbled like sugar left in the rain. She waited for him to say something. Anything. At dinner, when she served everyone before herself. When his mother corrected her pronunciation in front of guests. When she was told to stand during a family photo, because she was new. He said nothing. Adil was a good man. That's what everyone said. But being good was different from being brave. Sometimes he'd catch her eye across the room and give a small, apologetic smile. That was it. Once she tried to talk. She waited until they were alone, the bedroom light dim, the air still. "I feel like I don't belong here," she said softly. He took her hand. "She'll come around. Just give her time. You know how she is." But Amina didn't know. Not really. What kind of mother-in-law sent her new daughter-in-law to pick up dry cleaning in the rain? Alone? What kind of family watched her mop the floor and called it adjusting? She had thought love would protect her. Now she was beginning to realize. Love without voice was just silence in prettier clothes. It was almost midnight. She sat on the edge of her bed, small, cold, tucked away behind the staircase. The house was silent, but her thoughts weren't. Her phone lit up. Emmy calling. She hadn't answered in 2 days. Didn't want to worry her. Didn't want to lie. But tonight she picked up. Beta? Is everything okay? Amina hesitated. The lump in her throat threatened to rise. But she made her voice steady. Everything's fine, Amy. Just a little tired. There was a pause on the other end. Her mother didn't push. He never did. But before hanging up, she said something that stuck. Some people feed others with hands that look clean. But you'll know by the taste. The line went dead. Amina stared at the ceiling. Those words repeated like a drumbeat. She had swallowed insult after insult, bitterness wrapped in tradition. But tonight it tasted different. Wrong. Rotten. And somewhere deep inside something shifted. Just a little. The kind of shift that comes before an earthquake. It happened during a family brunch. Guests were over. Relatives, cousins, some neighbor aunties. The living room buzzed with laughter and the clink of teacups. Amina came in with a tray of samosas, smiling politely. Just as she reached the table, her mother-in-law's voice rang out, loud, clear, and deliberate. Set them over there, dear. We don't let the help serve directly at the table. Laughter. Just a few polite chuckles. But it was enough. Amina froze. The tray shook in her hands. Her face flushed with heat. No one defended her. No one corrected the insult. Even Adil looked away, sipping his tea like it was suddenly the most interesting thing in the room. She placed the tray down. Calmly. Quietly. But inside her something broke. Not like glass. Like a lock. She walked out of the room, her steps steady, her breath shallow. She didn't cry this time. Because tears were for grief. And what she felt now was fire. She waited until everyone left the house. The staff had finished early and the halls were finally empty. Amina stood in the kitchen, surrounded by steel pots, half-wilted coriander, and the echo of that word, help. She hadn't cried during the insult. But now the tears came quietly. No sobs. No dramatic wailing. Just hot rivers that slipped down her cheeks and disappeared into the collar of her kurta. She looked down at her hands, red from dish soap, rough from scrubbing. These were not the hands of the bride she once imagined she'd be. For a second she almost believed them. That she was just someone who didn't belong. Someone without value. But then she remembered her father's voice. If they see you as small, it's because they can't see past their own shadows. She wasn't small. She had simply been shrinking to fit inside their world. But she wouldn't shrink much longer. She wiped her face, turned off the light, and walked straight to the storage room, toward the door no one used anymore. The storage room was dusty and dim, filled with forgotten furniture and cardboard boxes marked in fading ink. But at the back, beneath an old trunk, she found what she'd been looking for. A slim black folder. Inside, certificates, photographs, and something her in-laws had never bothered to ask about. Amina had been more than a bride before marriage. She had been a business graduate. A project lead for a boutique tech firm. Someone who once pitched to investors in boardrooms while wearing sharp heels and sharper confidence. She had paused her career to support Adil's overseas job and his family's needs. Just for a while, they had said. But the while had turned into washing socks and dusting chandeliers. Holding those papers, she remembered who she really was. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel helpless. She felt focused. She returned the folder to its plastic sleeve, then slid it into her own suitcase. She didn't know how she'd use it yet. But she knew that she would. And it would start soon. There was one room in the house her mother-in-law never entered. It had belonged to Adil's father, now passed. A study filled with old books, files, and drawers she never touched. But Amina noticed the keys hanging quietly on a brass hook near the kitchen. Nobody paid attention to them. Late one night when the house was still, she took them. Her heart pounded, but her fingers didn't shake. The door creaked open. It smelled like dust and old wood. A heavy mahogany desk stood in the center, surrounded by shelves filled with legal binders and ledgers. On the wall, a family tree drawn in gold ink. She wasn't looking for secrets. She was looking for leverage. Inside a drawer, she found it. Papers for property holdings, including the estate they lived in. But the owner listed on the file wasn't her mother-in-law. It was Adil. And next to his name in careful handwriting was another. Amina Khan. Koner. She stepped back, stunned. No one had told her. Not even a deal. But now that she knew, silence would no longer be her role. The next morning, Amina served tea with her usual grace. But this time her eyes didn't drop. Her mother-in-law took the cup, not noticing the slight curve at the corner of Amina's mouth. A smile that held something deeper. "I hope the brass is polished properly today," the older woman said, sipping. "Oh yes," Amina replied, her voice light. "I even cleaned the study last night. Beautiful room. Shame no one uses it." The cup paused midair. "You went into that room?" her mother-in-law asked, tone sharp. "I had the keys," Amina said, setting down the sugar bowl. "I assumed it was part of my responsibilities." Their eyes locked. Something passed between them, silent, dangerous. Like a current under still water. But Amina didn't flinch. Not this time. Later that day she sat down with her laptop. Dusty but still working. She made a few calls. Sent a few emails. Scheduled an appointment with a lawyer who owed her a favor from her old job. She wasn't trying to win a war. She was simply reminding them who they married. A black SUV pulled into the driveway just after noon. Sleek, polished with tinted windows. Her mother-in-law peeked through the curtains, frowning. "Are we expecting someone?" "No," Amina said casually. "He's here for me." A man stepped out, mid-40s, sharp suit, confident gait. He carried a briefcase and greeted Amina with a respectful nod. They sat in the living room while her mother-in-law hovered, clearly unsettled. "I brought the revised documents," the man said, sliding the folder toward her. Amina didn't rush. She opened it slowly, initialed where needed, then passed a copy back to him. "What documents?" the older woman finally asked, unable to contain herself. "Just property updates," Amina replied without looking up. "I had some changes made. My name was on them already, but, well, it's good to have everything in order." The room chilled despite the afternoon sun. Her mother-in-law tried to speak, but the words didn't come. Because for the first time in this house, the maid didn't just serve the tea, she owned the table it was set on. Dinner was tense that evening. Her mother-in-law barely touched her food. Adil sensed the unease but said nothing. "Amina." She was calm, composed in a way that only made her silence louder. Then she cleared her throat. "There's something you both should see." She placed the property file in front of Adil. He flipped through the pages, eyes scanning fast. His brows lifted, then fell, then froze. When he looked up, he seemed confused. "I didn't know this," he said quietly. "You signed it when we were finalizing my visa," Amina replied gently. "Your father added me as co-owner to protect me in case anything happened while we lived abroad." Her mother-in-law paled. "That document's invalid," she snapped. "No," Amina replied, voice calm. "It was updated again last year. Quietly. He never removed me. And now the lawyers confirmed, it still stands." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't awkward. It was powerful. Because suddenly the girl who had been serving tea now owned the saucers beneath their hands. And they knew it. Over the next few days the tone in the house shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough for Amina to notice. Her mother-in-law still gave instructions, but now they were worded like suggestions. She no longer complained about breakfast. She even said thank you after Amina handed her a shawl. But the biggest change? Adil. He started coming home earlier. Asking if she needed help. Looking her in the eyes like he was finally seeing her again. "You could have told me," he said one night as they sat together. "You weren't ready to hear it," she replied, not bitter, just honest. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. All she did was stop hiding, and that somehow changed everything. She went back to her laptop every afternoon. Revived her resume. Took meetings. Made calls. Within 2 weeks she was consulting again, this time on her terms. No one dared call her help now. Because it had become clear, she was never just a maid in this house. She was the storm they didn't see coming, and the calm they had no choice but to respect. One morning, while pruning roses on the porch, Amina made a phone call, deliberately within earshot of her mother-in-law who was sipping tea nearby. Yes, I want the valuation for the main property and the side guest house. Email both, please. Her mother-in-law stiffened. Why would you need a valuation? Amina smiled without looking up. I'm exploring options. Adil and I are thinking about moving. Maybe downsizing. But this is our family home. Our family's home, Amina corrected gently. It was the first time her mother-in-law looked truly unsettled. She wasn't shouting. She was shaken. And that said more than words ever could. Later that day her sister-in-law called. Mom's acting weird. Did something happen? Amina answered carefully. Nothing happened. She's just learning something she forgot. Respect isn't inherited with property. It's earned, and so is forgiveness. That night her mother-in-law knocked before entering her room. The shift was complete. The woman who once treated her like staff now waited for permission to speak. And Amina. She'd never felt stronger. Relatives came to visit that weekend. A cousin from abroad brought gifts and gossip. Over lunch, someone joked, "Bet your in-laws have you working round the clock in this palace, huh?" Before Amina could answer, her mother-in-law jumped in. "Oh no, she's the queen of this place now." There was a pause. The cousin laughed awkwardly. "Queen? What, did she buy it?" "No," Amina said gently, folding a napkin. "It was a gift. From someone who respected me before anyone else did." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't brag. But her words cut clean. Later one of the cousins pulled her aside. "You live in her house?" Amina looked at them calmly. "No. She lives in mine." It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about control. It was about truth. For so long Amina had been made to feel like an outsider in her own home. But now every step she took echoed differently, because it came from a place of knowing. Knowing her worth. Her strength. And that no one could strip it from her again. Adil sat beside her one evening, his face unreadable. "I went through the old files," he said. "The ones in the study." Amina nodded. She had expected this. "I saw everything, your resume, your awards, the email threads from your old job. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him, not with anger but clarity. "I did. Just not in words. I cooked, cleaned, served, waited, and you never once asked who I was before I became wife. You were too busy being son." That struck something. He leaned back, quiet. "You know," she continued softly, "I didn't want to expose anyone. I just wanted to be seen. And now that I am, I don't need to prove anything." Adil reached out, gently taking her hand. "I see you now. And I'm sorry it took this long." For the first time in months, her heart didn't feel like it was carrying a weight. She didn't need him to apologize forever. She just needed him to understand. And finally he did. Buried in a drawer in the study, behind a folder of outdated bills, Amina had found a letter. Handwritten in blue ink, folded neatly. It was addressed to Adil. From his father. She read it only once. Then tucked it back where it belonged. In the letter, Adil's father wrote of his hopes. For his son, his future wife, and the house they would live in. "Don't forget," he had written, "the woman you marry should be your mirror, not your shadow." That line stayed with her. Adil never mentioned the letter. Maybe he hadn't found it yet. Or maybe he had and didn't know what to say. But Amina didn't need him to. She knew now that her value didn't come from his validation or his mother's approval. It came from within, from the girl who had once stood in boardrooms and still stood tall while being dismissed as the help. She folded the letter again gently and left it on his pillow. Some truths weren't meant to be screamed. They were meant to be remembered. The next Friday the house was full again, just like the early days. Relatives, laughter, food. But the atmosphere had changed. Warmer. Softer. Amina cooked by choice. Not because she was told to. She chose the menu, led the preparations, and directed the house staff with quiet confidence. Her mother-in-law hovered nearby, offering help. Once. Then backed away respectfully. During dinner, Adil stood and raised a toast. "To my wife," he said, voice steady. "For her grace, her strength, and for being the best part of this family, even when we didn't deserve her." Everyone clapped. Some looked surprised. A few embarrassed. But Amina, he just smiled. Not smugly. Not with revenge. Just peace. Her mother-in-law glanced up, met her eyes, and for the first time nodded. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something real. Recognition. That night Amina didn't sit last at the table. She didn't serve. She was served. And though she didn't ask for it, the moment tasted sweeter than any dessert. A week later Amina walked through the halls of the house she once felt trapped in. She touched the corners she'd cleaned, the rooms she'd cried in. Passed by the kitchen where she'd once wiped away tears with the back of her hand. The floors where she'd once walked like she didn't belong. Now she walked like she owned the ground beneath her feet. As she did. Not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. She paused at the study door. It was locked again, respectfully. She didn't need to go back in. Then she reached the porch where a fresh batch of roses had bloomed. Behind her, her mother-in-law appeared. "You've changed," she said softly. Amina turned. "No. I just stopped shrinking." A beat passed. "I'm sorry," her mother-in-law added, voice low, "for forgetting who you are." Amina didn't answer with words. She nodded. And that was enough. She didn't need vengeance. She had already won. And now she had one last thing to do. The invitation came 2 weeks later. Amina had just accepted a remote consulting role, well paid, flexible, and fully hers. To celebrate, she planned a small dinner. Not at the estate. At her childhood home. She invited Adil, her in-laws, her own parents. The table was long, candles lit, food served by hired staff in crisp uniforms. Halfway through the meal, her mother-in-law reached for more rice. Amina smiled. "Ruxana, could you please help her?" A server stepped forward politely and filled her plate. For a flicker of a moment, her mother-in-law seemed stunned. She had gotten a taste of real service. Gracious, professional, kind. And this time she was on the receiving end. Not humiliated. Not insulted. Just served. Amina wasn't mocking her. She was demonstrating the difference between power and dignity. Between control and respect. At the end of the evening, Amina stood to thank everyone. "I've learned that silence doesn't protect you," she said. "But knowing your worth does." And with that she ended the night on her terms. Graceful. Whole. Not a maid. A mirror. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and rises when no one expects it. If you've ever been underestimated, let this be your reminder. Your worth isn't decided by others. It's discovered by you. If this story moved you, drop a heart in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories every week.